They made fun of me like I wasn't sitting right there. The conference room was full of laughter, confident voices celebrating a success they thought they'd created. And I sat quietly in my chair, simple navy sweater slightly wrinkled from a long week, hands resting on the table. I didn't join the celebration. I didn't smile. I just listened as they congratulated each other, as they recounted their brilliant decisions, as they talked about the project like I hadn't spent 6 months making sure it didn't fall apart. They had no idea, none of them, and I wasn't sure yet whether I was going to tell them. The meeting had been called to celebrate the launch of our biggest project of the year, a mobile platform that had gone live 2 weeks earlier and was already exceeding performance metrics. The VP was beaming. The project manager was taking credit. The design team was proud. Even the interns looked accomplished, like they'd contributed something meaningful. And maybe they had in their own way. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the reason this project worked, the reason it hadn't crashed on day one, the reason clients were happy and metrics were green, was because I'd been working 16-hour days fixing everyone's mistakes, quietly, invisibly, without ever asking for recognition. Someone made a comment about how smooth the launch had been. "No issues at all," the project manager said proudly. A few people nodded in agreement. I almost laughed. No issues. There had been dozens of issues, critical ones, the kind that could have tanked the entire project. A database configuration error that would have caused massive data loss, a security vulnerability that would have exposed client information, a payment integration bug that would have prevented transactions from processing. I'd caught them all, fixed them all, usually at 2 in the morning while everyone else was asleep, dreaming about their success. But I hadn't sent emails announcing my fixes. I hadn't scheduled meetings to explain what I'd done. I'd just done the work because that's what needed to happen. Then someone made a joke. One of the senior developers, a guy named Marcus who'd been with the company for maybe 18 months and thought he knew everything. "We should thank our IT guy," he said with a smirk, gesturing vaguely in my direction. A few people chuckled. "For keeping the lights on." More laughter. I kept my expression neutral, my intelligent eyes watching him carefully, measuring his confidence. The VP grinned. "Yes, we appreciate all the support staff," he said, like I was someone who reset passwords and unjammed printers. Like I hadn't architected half the back-end infrastructure they were celebrating. I didn't correct him, not yet. I just sat there, clean-shaven face, calm, and let them continue. The project manager started going through the timeline, talking about key decisions they'd made. "We decided early on to use a microservices architecture," he said confidently. Except he hadn't decided that. I had. I'd written a 20-page analysis explaining why monolithic architecture would fail at scale and why microservices was the only viable option. He'd read maybe 2 pages of it, then presented my recommendation as his own idea in a meeting I wasn't invited to. But I didn't say anything. I just listened as he continued, as he described solutions to problems he didn't even know had existed, as he claimed ownership of work I'd done while he was taking long lunches. Marcus spoke up again. "The front-end integration was seamless," he said. "I made sure the API endpoints were optimized." Except he hadn't. His code had been a disaster. Inefficient queries, no caching, endpoints that would have collapsed under any real load. I'd spent an entire weekend refactoring his work, rewriting entire sections, implementing proper optimization. I'd left his name on the commits because I didn't care about credit. I cared about the project not failing. But sitting there, listening to him take credit for work he'd actively made worse, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, something colder, something that had been building for years. The VP asked if there were any challenges during the launch. The project manager shook his head. "Nothing we couldn't handle," he said smoothly. I thought about the call I'd gotten at midnight on launch day. A critical error in the payment processing system, transactions failing, clients unable to complete purchases. The project manager had panicked, sent me a frantic message, then gone to bed and told me to figure it out. I figured it out. diagnosed the issue, traced it to a third-party API change that no one had accounted for, wrote a workaround, deployed it, and had everything running again within 90 minutes. The next morning, the project manager sent a team email saying we resolved the issue quickly. We, as if he'd been there, as if he'd done anything except sleep. Someone asked about future improvements. The design lead started talking about interface updates, about user experience enhancements they were planning. All good ideas, all things I'd suggested in documentation they'd never read. I'd written detailed specifications, drawn up diagrams, created prototypes, and now I was watching them present my ideas as brainstorming breakthroughs they'd just come up with. One of the designers even said, I was thinking we could add a dashboard feature. I built that dashboard 3 months ago. It was already in the production code. They just hadn't noticed because they never looked at what I actually did. They just assumed if they didn't see me in meetings, I wasn't doing anything important. The celebration continued. Someone brought up metrics. User engagement was high. System uptime was perfect. Client satisfaction scores were the best we'd ever had. The VP raised his coffee cup like a toast. This is what happens when a team works well together, he said. Everyone smiled. Everyone nodded. Everyone felt proud of themselves. And I sat there, my simple button-down collar slightly loose because I'd lost weight from stress and skipped meals. And I wondered what would happen if I just stood up and left, if I stopped fixing their mistakes, stopped covering for their incompetence, stopped being the invisible safety net that kept this whole operation from collapsing. How long would it take before everything fell apart? Marcus made another comment. Honestly, the hard part is over. Maintaining this should be easy. He looked around the room for validation. A few people agreed. Easy. I thought about the monitoring systems I'd built, the automated alerts I'd configured, the backup protocols I'd implemented that no one even knew existed. I thought about the fact that just last night, one of those alerts caught a server issue that would have caused a 12-hour outage. I'd fixed it remotely from my couch during a show I wasn't even watching anymore because I was too tired to focus. And now Marcus, who couldn't debug his own code without my help, was saying maintenance would be easy.
That's when something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a thread pulled too tight finally breaking. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the table, and spoke for the first time since the meeting started. Can I ask a question? My voice was calm, measured, the kind of tone that made people pause. The VP looked surprised, like he'd forgotten I could speak. Of course, he said. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. Does anyone here know what actually happened during launch week? The room went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people thinking, the uncertain quiet of people realizing they might have missed something. The project manager frowned slightly. What do you mean? He asked. I didn't rush my answer. I took my time, choosing my words carefully. I mean the issues, the actual technical problems that occurred. Does anyone know what they were? Marcus shifted in his seat. There weren't any major issues, he said defensively. I looked at him. There were 17 critical issues, I said calmly, between launch day and last Tuesday. The VP's expression changed. 17? I nodded. Would you like me to list them? No one answered, so I did. I went through them methodically. The database error on day 1 that would have corrupted client data, the security vulnerability on day 2 that would have exposed authentication tokens, the memory leak on day 3 that was crashing servers every 4 hours, the API endpoint failure, the caching issue, the load balancer misconfiguration. I listed all 17 with technical details, timestamps, and the solutions I'd implemented. I spoke for maybe 3 minutes, and no one interrupted me once. When I finished, the room was completely silent. The project manager's face had gone pale. Marcus was staring at the table. The VP was looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You fixed all of those? He asked quietly. I nodded. Yes. He paused. Why didn't you tell anyone? I met his eyes. I did. I sent incident reports after each one, detailed documentation, root cause analysis, prevention recommendations. I sent them to the project channel. No one responded. The project manager opened his laptop quickly, probably searching for emails he'd never read. "Why didn't you escalate?" the VP asked, and I could hear something in his voice now. Not anger, concern, maybe even guilt. I kept my voice even. Because escalating meant delaying fixes while we scheduled meetings to discuss problems that needed to be solved immediately. I made a choice. Fix first, report after. I assumed the reports would be read eventually. The assumption hung in the air like an accusation, because we all knew they hadn't been read. They'd been ignored. I'd been ignored. For months. Marcus cleared his throat. "The API optimization I mentioned, did you—" He trailed off. I looked at him. "I refactored your entire integration layer. Your initial implementation would have failed at scale. I rewrote it during the weekend before launch." His face flushed red. He started to say something, then stopped. What could he say? I turned to the project manager. "The payment issue you mentioned in your status email, the one we resolved, I resolved it at midnight while you were asleep. You messaged me at 11:47 p.m. saying it was urgent. I had it fixed by 1:15 a.m. You sent the team email at 9 a.m. taking credit." The room was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system. The project manager looked like he wanted to disappear. I thought it was a team effort," he mumbled. I didn't let him off the hook. "It was my effort," I said calmly. "Just like the database migration was my effort, and the server optimization, and the security audit, and the monitoring system that's currently the only reason we know when something breaks. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't being emotional. I was just stating facts. And facts, delivered calmly, hit harder than any accusation." The VP sat back in his chair. "How much of this project was you?" he asked directly. Honestly, I appreciated that. I thought about it for a moment. The architecture design, the back-end implementation, about 60% of the front-end optimization, all of the database work, the deployment pipeline, the monitoring and alerting systems, the security protocols, and every critical fix since launch. I paused. Roughly 70% of the technical work. The number landed like a weight. Someone inhaled sharply. The VP just stared at me. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" he asked quietly. And that was the real question, wasn't it? Why had I let them take credit? Why had I stayed silent? Because I believed the work mattered more than the recognition. I believed if I did good work, eventually people would notice. I was wrong. The VP nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "you were. And we were wrong too for not noticing." It was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get, and honestly, it was enough. The meeting ended shortly after that. No more celebration, no more jokes. People left quietly, avoiding eye contact with me, probably replaying every conversation where they'd dismissed me or talked over me or treated me like I didn't matter. The VP asked me to stay. When everyone else had gone, he closed the door and sat back down. "I owe you an apology," he said. I shook my head. "You owe me a raise and a new title and a seat at the table when decisions are being made." He blinked, surprised by my directness. Then he smiled slightly. "Fair enough." 2 weeks later, I was promoted, Senior Systems Architect, a 30% salary increase and a new clause in my contract that required my approval on any major technical decisions. The project manager was reassigned to a different team. Marcus became noticeably quieter in meetings, and I was invited to every planning session, every strategy discussion, every meeting where the future of our projects was decided, not as support staff, as leadership. People treated me differently after that, not out of fear, out of respect. They asked for my input before making decisions. They read my documentation, they credited my work, and when something went wrong, they came to me first, not to blame me, but to ask for help. Because they'd learned what I'd always known. The quiet people aren't always powerless. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right moment to speak. I never made fun of anyone in meetings. I never took credit for work I didn't do. I stayed exactly who I'd always been, intelligent, restrained, focused on the work. But now, when I spoke, people listened, because they knew I only spoke when I had something worth saying. And they knew that behind every success they celebrated, there was probably work I'd done that they'd never see. Work that kept everything running. Work that mattered. They didn't make fun of me anymore. They couldn't afford to.